Hello?
Hello, everyone. This is JJ Richa, and I have with me Ken Aldrich. I'm going to let Ken, in a few minutes, introduce himself. But before we do that, I want to welcome you to another live broadcast and a fireside chat with thought leaders in the community. And when we get in, you will see, you will hear from Ken and what he has done during his career, especially when it comes to entrepreneurs, startups, and angel investing. So, just a little bit before we get to Ken, one is we'll be on for about an hour. You're welcome, every one of you, to start asking questions as soon as you want. And we will start with some questions for Ken, um, but you're welcome to do that. So, if for some reason we couldn't get to your question, you can always email me at pvinfo@pismoventures.com, and I'll be able to forward them to Ken and for any response. Um, so the purpose of this broadcast and the broadcast that we're doing is really to help startups, help entrepreneurs, uh, and the ecosystem that we are all part of understand and navigate the vibrant community, and really to bring on board thought leaders and investors and entrepreneurs, serious entrepreneurs and movers and shakers in the community to help everyone understand what it really takes to really start a business, grow a business, what it takes to get funding, what it takes to really get it to a potential exit. And offline, Ken and I were talking a few minutes ago about really, can everyone get to an IPO, or maybe they should always try to figure out a different strategy. Um, so, just a little bit about Pismo Ventures. We are a venture studio. We've been around for a couple of years, and um, what we do is we help startups with their startup needs, and then we also help them raise capital. If they're not ready, we help them get ready to be fundable. And what we've been doing lately, we have been doing special purpose vehicles, SPVs, to help them raise capital as well. Other than that, we help with the technology as well. So if you have technology needs and human capital, so we invest cash, we invest human capital as well, and we help you raise capital if you are ready. And if you're not ready, we can help you get ready. Um, so I want to, before I introduce Ken, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you get access to many of the videos and broadcasts that we have. We have lots of them. And then also, please don't forget to subscribe to our social media channels so you're able to receive our news all the time. Well, Ken, good morning. Well, we're
Morning.
still in the morning. How are you? How are you today? Oh, I hope we didn't lose Ken for a second here. Ken, are you there? I just lost Ken, it looks like. Hopefully he'll be back. Sorry, it must have been something related to the internet, everyone. I apologize, but here he is. It looks like
There, I'm back. I got a
yeah.
little note that it was Wi-Fi problems, and they wanted me to get closer to the router. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that except by crawling under a table. I didn't think that was what we wanted to do. So hopefully it'll work. And it may not even be at my end. It may be somewhere else. But anyway,
No, you're
uh,
good. Good morning. Please just give us a little bit of a introduction to you.
well, I'm a retired serial entrepreneur and angel investor. I retired from the real estate business in, gosh, probably the late 90s, and got into some early stage venture capital. I was looking for something different to do, and just in time for the crash of 2000, survived that with some bruises, and then went on and had some successful deals, and have been basically, pursuing this venture capital ever since.
All right, that's good. Um, Ken, today it's an open forum. It's a easy fireside chat. So we're gonna talk about few things. One is one of the biggest, the biggest exit that Tecos Angels had. You and I are both members of Tecos Angels. And the biggest exit that Tecos Angels had is a company called Green Dot. My understanding is you were the lead investor or co-lead with Raleigh Marcus on uh, Green Dot. Tell us a little bit about the history, how it started, and what it took, and how long it took to get an IPO out of Green Dot.
Okay, well, it's somewhat of an interesting story, at least to me. I came home from a vacation. I'd been in Africa, and got a message from Raleigh and said, "I need to talk to you about a company." And I said, "Okay, I'll listen." So I went to the meeting, and she described Green Dot, and I said, "Yeah, but I'm just back from vacation. I'm just not ready to take on the job of being the lead on an investment." She said, "Well, meet Steve Street, who was the CEO." And so I arranged the meeting with Steve, was enormously impressed. And Rolly and I set about to get this thing funded with TCA. And the problem was that TCA just didn't have any interest in a company which was going to sell credit cards or debit cards, excuse me, to teenagers, which was the original business model. And they were right, actually. But we twisted arms and broke elbows long enough to get the funding for it. I think we did about $1 million in funding. I don't remember anymore, but it was around that. They did have some additional funding that came in at the same time, and we got the company off the ground. Then there was a long dry period in which we just couldn't make money. They realized that selling to teenagers wasn't going to work. They sell some, but not enough to make a business. And so they had to redesign the company so that it was targeting a broader market, which they did and did very successfully. And fortunately, in that period, Raleigh knew some people who knew some people, and we ended up getting Sequoia Capital interested in the company. So they came in, and by the way, they were a wonderful partner. You hear lots of horror stories about VCs.
Yeah.
They came in, they bought straight equity. They never once in the time we were there tried to muscle us or squeeze out existing investors. So I want to give them a shout out because they're a great company. We worked with Mike Moritz, but I'm assuming everybody else there is of a comparable cloth. Anyway, the long and short of it is they changed the model. We started getting revenue, and it got significant enough that after 10 years, we were able to do an IPO at 100 times our original investment. So our original investment was 34 cents a share. Don't know how that came about. And we sold at $35 a share. So it was a great story. The company has subsequently bounced up and down, uh, above and below that IPO mark, but it's still been a fun sleigh ride. I stayed on the board and didn't sell a lot of stock. Raleigh was smarter than I am. She got off the board and sold a lot of stock almost at the peak. So if you want somebody to tell you when to sell stock, talk to her. She was brilliant on this one. Anyway, that's about the story. It was great.
Interesting. So you're glad that you still went through it, even if you're right after a vacation and you didn't want to deal with it. Now, uh, aftermath, it's a good thing that happened. I wanted to ask you, so the business transformed from selling to wealthy teenagers, and it ended up being completely different as a successful business, correct?
Yeah, it wasn't targeted at wealthy teenagers. It was targeted at any teenager who had an allowance. So that is probably, middle class and up. Um,
Okay.
but they couldn't buy stuff on the internet in those days without any uh, debit card. So we
Yeah.
thought, well, this would give them something that frees them from having to beg mom and dad for the credit card. The real market turned out to be basically the profile is the Walmart shopper in simple terms, but income $70,000 and down, um, and that really was the target, and is the target. So
Interesting.
now they've tried to expand it, and they have successfully in various areas, but that's still the core target for that business. Now the company itself has changed into an online bank, and is much more than a debit card company now, but that still is a core of the business that they have.
All right. All right. Okay. So today, so this was just to introduce everyone to the co-lead of the biggest exit that uh, or investment multiples that PCA had. Today, we're talking about entrepreneurial mindset and what you're doing can to really help young entrepreneurs with their journey. So tell us what you mean by entrepreneurial mindset.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Let me take a little bit of a roundabout way to tell you how I got to this. I have
Okay.
the last 10 years been acting as a mentor to the to the teacher to the students, excuse me, in a class on entrepreneurship, in a setup in a charter school in a very low income area.
Yeah, we can hear you. So
Home, and it's interrupting our signal. Anyway, what I discovered in that was that uh, as I was working with these kids, many of them had no concept that there was anything beyond getting their diploma or a GED, getting a job somewhere, working 40 hours a week, waiting for the weekend, having a weekend that was too short, and hoping for a retirement that might or might not be there. And just a lousy outlook. So I said, I've got to open the window shades somehow. And the idea was to open up through entrepreneurship. And so I did a lot of that, of course, in the class. And then I realized I'm only reaching 30 kids in a whole semester. And I can do that, but that's not the most effective way I can tell this story. So I started publishing a blog, which is still up at dreamtoolbox.com if you want to see it. Um, and I hope you do. Uh, and published about 27 5-minute videos, or not videos, audios on different aspects of entrepreneurship and trying to open these windows to what the opportunities really were. Um, and then people said, gee, those are great. We love them. Why don't you put that in a book? So being as dumb as I am, I started out to write a book and ended up with a book also called Dream Toolbox, which frankly I'm happy with. It was a lot of work, and I spent a lot of time thinking I was an idiot to try, but it turned out well, and I think it's been a good guide. So that's been kind of the background of the history of what I've been up to in the last few years, is getting that out, publicizing it, trying to spread the word on that as best I can, because it's a good trainer for resetting the entrepreneurial mind. And by that I mean a mind that looks at all problems as puzzles that can be solved, and looks at never says I can't, but always says I can, which is just the reverse of what we're taught, by the way. And as you all know, we're said, we're taught from childhood, don't do that, don't run in the street, don't touch the stove, don't do this. And life is full of don'ts. But
Yep.
an entrepreneur, it's also full of I can't, which are don'ts in its own way, but also full of the opportunity to say yes. And so that's what I'm trying to talk about, and then show ways to do it, ways to develop an idea that might be a business, because that's often the problem, and so on, and a lot of other stuff we can talk to as much as we get to today. I don't know how our time is doing.
Yeah. That's actually fascinating because it, giving back to the young minds is really important. And in my opinion, Ken, without the innovation, without getting, when we're young, everything is open. But then when you hear all these don'ts, then people, and especially teenagers, starts holding back. And you're saying it is an open space. It is an unlimited. You have unlimited opportunities to do things, and that's, I'm assuming, where the word entrepreneurial mindset comes from. So maybe you can expand on that.
Well, yeah, again, it starts from this concept of taking any idea and immediately shifting your inner dialogue, if you will, from I can't to I can. Because once you do that, then it opens up the world when you say, yeah, I can do that. So that's, to my mind, is probably the most important entrepreneurial aspect, that inner belief that I can do this, whatever this is. So to me, that's the beginning of the entrepreneurial mind. And there are lots of other aspects that get into it, of flexibility, how you view difficulties, how you get past difficulties. That's one of my favorite thought processes, is to shift. Words are things, and words have real power. So if you can shift your mindset when there's a problem, from saying, oh my God, that's a barrier, what am I going to do, to, oh, that's a really tough looking puzzle, let's see if I can't solve it. Because puzzles, by definition, have a solution. Barriers don't necessarily have any solution except to bang your head on them, and that's no fun. So if I can get people, particularly young people, to think just a little differently, and uh, think of barriers as being puzzles instead, it changes the world for them. At least it can. And so that's one of the things that I try to teach as an entrepreneurial mindset. And where I get a chance to, it works.
Very interesting. So I'm gonna put a little twist on it because that's what I tell my children.
That,
Um, so I tell them it's the difference between growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset, they see a problem and they say, "Oh, it's a problem." The growth mindset says, "Oh, it's a problem. What can I find? Can I find a solution for it?" With with a fixed mindset, what they say is, "I can't solve it. It's a problem. I can't solve it." Versus, "It's a puzzle. Let me find a solution," just like you said. Um, so one of the questions that popped up on the screen right now from Pamela Saunders, and this is what I run into all the time. And what about the fear of failure? Because that's what happens. Everybody's scared of failing, and that's why they don't want to try. How do you address that, Ken?
well, first of all, I think that the fear of failure may be the biggest obstacle to a successful entrepreneurial venture. It's paralyzing, and you can't have a success with a CEO who has a paralyzed mindset. And the advice I've given, and it's worked for me many times, and it's worked for other people that I know, is this: take a look at what you're afraid of. Get somewhere where you can think quietly and take a look at what you're afraid of and dive deep and say, okay, what is the absolute worst thing I can imagine that would happen if this venture fails? Then you say, could I survive that? And 99% of the time, the answer is going to be yes, I could survive it. I might not like it, but I could survive it. Once you do that, you've taken all the fear out of it. You already know that you can survive the worst thing that could happen. Then why not go for the best thing that could happen, which is your dream? And I think it works. Well, I don't think it works. I know it works. It's just a remarkably simple and effective tool to use. Just look into the abyss, see if you can stand it, and come back out. If the answer is I can't survive it, I'm going to die, maybe it's a bad business venture. But I would apply that to all skydiving.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because I've spoken to many entrepreneurs in their later years, and where they've decided to actually dive into their dream and do it. And they all told me, I wish I did it 30 years ago
Now,
or 20 years ago. They all said the same thing because the fear of failure wasn't as bad as they thought it would be.
I'll tell you a story that may
Yeah.
illustrate that. When I was a young lawyer in LA in a big prestigious firm, and I was unhappy, and so I, after a lot of soul searching, made the decision to get out of a cut in salary, taking a job in business that had no guarantee that I'd be there the next month, and just doing it. And what was amazing to me was the number of my compatriots who came up to me with obvious envy. And I said, how can you be envious of somebody who just took a pay cut and a no future job or whatever? But they were coming out of fear. And it was obvious that they wanted to do the same thing, but
Yep.
they were, I don't know what the fears were that drove them, but it was very clear that's what was going on. And it was pretty simple. And I'd gone through the same process. I'd looked at it and said, what happens if the worst case happens? Well, I might have to go back to practicing law at a less prestigious firm. And I said, I'll do that if necessary. Fortunately, never had to, because I don't think I would have been I might have been a good lawyer, but I wouldn't have been a happy lawyer.
All right. I think we may have answered this question, but maybe other obstacles. But what is, or what are the greatest obstacles to success for a would-be entrepreneur, other than the fear of failure?
Well, that's a tough one because there are lots of obstacles that can be a barrier. One of the ones that for me is a really big one is inflexibility and the inability to do a mind shift when you need it, and the inability to look at a particular business proposition and say this will not work. Sometimes you come to that, and that
Yeah.
usually leads either you fold up the company, but more often I think it leads to what if we did this and this to the business to see if it would work, which is what Steve did at Green Dot. He had a business model that just simply didn't work, but instead of giving up on it, he found a whole different business model to plug it into. So I think that's one of the bigger causes of failure is an inability to do that. And you can teach yourself to, or learn to deal with that. And again, what we talked about with facing fear of failure is a good first step. You've got to get in the water and swim before you can do anything else. Um, I'm trying to think if there are other barriers to success. There are obviously many. I'm trying to think of the internal ones.
What about, well, you talked about inflexibility, or maybe the ability to pivot. How about coachability?
Well, coachability, yes, good point. Thank you for reminding me of what I should have been saying. Yeah, appreciate it. I really do. Yeah, coachability is a critical factor. If you're going to try to be an entrepreneur and with startup companies, because if you've picked your early investors well, there'll be people with some experience and wisdom that you don't have when you're doing it. And so if you ignore their advice without really giving it thought and just resist it because it's not what you had in mind, you greatly increase your chance of failure. So yes, coachability is critical, and you may have a coach or a mentor that's right in your field, and if you don't take advantage of that person, you're crazy, and you don't deserve to be an entrepreneur, because a really good coach or mentor is just invaluable, and you can survive without them. I did never really had one, but I've seen the people who have, and if they listen, it's like jumping on a rocket, and much easier, much faster, many fewer risks. So yeah, that's failing to be coachable is a really big barrier.
Yeah, it seems like, Ken, like, at TCA and many of the other investments that that I deal with all the time, is that we're always looking for that coachability, as an important factor, because it does give you the, maybe an indication if someone is willing to pivot as well, or change, or be flexible.
Yeah.
If they're not coachable, they're probably not that flexible.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right about that. I was the managing investor director or TCA representative on a company that I won't be too specific about, but had a very charismatic CEO, and what appeared to be a good business idea and a good business model. And so we funded him, and as it turned out, the model was tweakable, but it wasn't perfect, so it needed some work. And we gave him good advice. There was another co-lead who was very sophisticated in his field, and so gave him great advice on that score. And I was able to give him some on strategy, which he ignored completely, and ultimately did what we suggested he not do, and ran the company into the ground. And it was all about coachability.
Yep.
Is just too big to accept anything but his own ideas.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about your message and what you're trying to do for young entrepreneurs, or would-be entrepreneurs, because you're really trying to get these young individuals to really, think of entrepreneurship and starting their own journey, instead of thinking that the only way to go through life is to work for someone 40 hours a week. So, how can one begin to choose the right goals?
Well, there are multiple ways. Obviously, we choose the things that we love, or that fascinate us, and so on. But in terms of being specific on it, I have the kids that I work with. I have them go through a drill that is, seems very simple, seems almost grade schoolish, but it works. And I say, get a piece of paper, get into a room where it's quiet. You can, if nobody talks in the classroom, you can do it in the classroom, and we usually do.
Yeah.
And for 10 minutes, write down everything that you would like to do, if you knew that you couldn't fail. And that's the important part.
Yeah. So
Don't
really,
think, huh?
it's an intentional exercise that they need to do.
Yeah, yeah. I recommend it to them very strongly, because if they do that and do it, and don't edit out any ideas. I say, look, don't edit out anything, because suppose Wilbur and Orville Wright had edited out flying by saying, well, no, nobody can fly. So don't edit it all out. Take the list, put it away overnight, come back the next day and look at it and see what jumps out at you. Something almost always will. And I've used that many, many times with young people who were floundering as to what direction they wanted to go, but they knew they wanted to do something entrepreneurial, and it works. It's really simple and it works. So I use it as a tool all the time.
So what's next, Ken? Someone puts their goals down. What's next?
Well, then they've got to start implementing them. You put the goals down. You then have to build a plan and say, what does it take? What would it take to get to these goals? And plot that out as carefully as you can, as carefully as your knowledge base permits you, so that you know where the next step should be, and that'll be different for each company. But if you start plotting it out and saying, okay, what do we need to do next, and then what's the ultimate goal, and how do they relate, it usually becomes fairly obvious. So I've not found that to be that big a problem. If people are clear about the goal, then plotting the waypoints to get there is usually not that difficult. They'll be wrong sometimes, and they'll have to adjust them and change them, but the basic directional pattern will be the same. So that's not been, in my experience, has not been a big problem for anybody.
That's interesting. In your blogs and videos and book, do you help them kind of plot the way through?
Well, I try to. I don't know whether I've succeeded in the book or not, but I do talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of it, about raising money, about how you build a PowerPoint presentation, or investor deck, however you want to call it, and a lot of other tools like that. I talk about in the book. I don't do it in the blogs, but I talk about it in the book.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of that in there. But what I tried to avoid was one of these how-to manuals that gives you 27 pages on how to write a business plan that's longer than 27 pages and useless. So, and I hope I've succeeded in some of that. And but that's been the goal of it, is to try to simplify that and give them some tools as to where to go for when they have a specific issue. And I think I've succeeded in large part on that. Give them the starting point and then the tools to work from that.
Okay. So does it really matter where they begin?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by where they begin. It certainly can be. The short answer is, I think, no. If the best place to begin is about the time you're in high school, and I've had several high school students who started businesses while in high school that have been fairly successful. So that's optimal, because then you really have time to make mistakes and learn from them, because it becomes part of your education. But the same principles will work for somebody who's, a middle-aged guy or gal who can't stand their job anymore and realizes that it's a dead-end future. So the same things will work in that context, I think. Yeah, well, I know they do, because I've known of several people who've taken the concepts and said, okay, let me change my mindset about how I do things. In some cases, it improved how they did their job, and they changed the job itself into something they said no longer dreaded. And that's fine. Not everybody go out and start a business, but the thinking process can change even a mundane job into something much more important. You think about it. If you were a clerk at Starbucks or whatever, how they don't call them clerks, but working at Starbucks and you're cleaning tables and whatever, you could just do that. Or you could do that and think about how Starbucks could do it better while you're doing it. And pretty soon your mind opens up, and I don't imagine Starbucks would change, but they might. And if not, you'd have some ideas and some lessons that you could use in some other context.
Okay. All right. So we talked about fear of failure, but what, in your opinion, what are the greatest causes of failure other than the fear? It looks like Ken may be having an
Fear. Hello. There we go.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, you're back. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't have a clue. Anyway, yeah. Apart from the fear of failure, I think the failure to innovate, the failure to pivot, failure to keep an open mind about what the possibilities are. One of the big failures, though, is a very pragmatic one, and that's a failure to figure out who your market is. I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs have come into me with business plans and business models, and I say, okay, who's going to buy it? And they say, well, the global market for products in this area. And I say, no, who's going to buy it? What are they going to look like? Is it going to, mostly a 35-year-old woman with 2 kids? Or what do you think it's going to be? And what's your market research? And many times the entrepreneurs simply fail to do that adequately. And then, the other questions that go along with that on the other side are all the questions about cost of goods sold, and can you make, even if you can sell them, can you make them at a price that's workable, and so on. A lot of entrepreneurs have no concept of margins, and so they're selling a lot and not making any money, or at least if they followed their model, they would be selling a lot.
Yeah. So what do you what I guess, what are ways to avoid failures or potential failures?
Well, first of all, I think realize if you're talking about starting a business, they're going to happen. May not be your business, but most entrepreneurs that I know, frankly, have failed the first couple of times. So that's one step, is just to know that it's part of the game, and survivable, and you learn from it, and then you get one that doesn't fail, and you're, Jeff Bezos all of a sudden. But so that's one, is just to position yourself to try and then try again if you need to. And that's partly economic. You don't want to spend your last dollar on the first venture you love, because you need time to recover if it doesn't go right, because it can fail for reasons that are, I won't say they're beyond you, but that are not predictable. And so leave room in the kettle to do it again, emotionally and economically. So that's, one of the biggest reasons, is just not looking at the possibility of failing. I lost track of the question. Even where were we?
Yeah, it's how to avoid the failures, basically.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, I think that obviously that's one.
yeah,
Another way to avoid the failures is, I believe, to try to look at the details. So often I see plans that come in that are very globally constructed, and there may be a prototype if it's a piece of hardware or something, or some ideas, but there's not really been any effort uh, to look at the economics, to look at the market niche, to see where it's going to fit, and to try to figure that out in advance. You'll likely be wrong. I always say that if I have a set of 3-year projections, the one thing I know for sure is the third year is going to be wrong. Might be better, might be worse, but it'll be wrong. And
yeah,
so that's just the nature of stuff. But the willingness to look and the ability to look at those various pieces is critical to avoiding failure. The other part is you're going to need some people around you. You may want or need. In most of my deals, I've been most successful when I've had a partner, because it's lonely at the top, and you want somebody who will tell you that your ideas are full of baloney. And somebody who works for you and depends on you for a paycheck is likely not to say that. So
right.
I've always liked having a partner if I could find a good one. Uh, but that's you still have to find a partner, find a good or get good employees or both, so that you have good people around you, because nobody's successful all by themselves. And
Yeah.
so to me, that's a critical factor, is who's in the boat with you at the beginning. And if it's the right people, you have a much better chance of success. Doesn't have to be a lot of people, it can be one or two,
Yeah.
but you do need that.
So part of what you're saying too is, hey, look, you're gonna fail. It's okay. Just learn from it, adjust, and move on.
Well,
Really.
you might get lucky and not fail, but generally speaking, we'll have failures, or at least major setbacks. Uh,
Yeah.
I like to say that none of the successful businesses that I've ever owned, either owned a piece of or founded, have ever gotten to that point, to the success point, without some near-death experience. It's
Yep.
just been universal that there comes a point where the company is facing a life or death set of decisions. Usually they're economic, but not always.
Yeah. Yeah. So Albert is asking a question, and the essence of his question is, um, I'm 60% through my bachelor's degree. Do you think, he's asking you, do you think it's more important to complete my degree to succeed in a startup, or should I gain some more experience before I start a startup?
Well, I would go ahead and get the degree. I mean, this may be my bias, but I think I we live in a society in which degrees open doors. And even though his goal may be to start businesses, um, it'll just it'll add to his credibility to have, you know, a degree in business or a degree in whatever it's going to be in. Uh, and I think it's worthwhile. I don't know where you are in how expensive the remainder of it will be. I hate to see anybody get into a mountain of student debt, but in general, uh, I, the college diploma does help in many ways, and so that's the world we live in. I think if I were you and could afford it, I would go ahead and get it.
Yep, I would say the same thing.
Bill Gates started Microsoft while he was working on his degree, and he never finished the degree. But the reason was he was starting Microsoft. If that's the reason for dropping out, then drop out. But otherwise, I think it's worthwhile.
Yep, I'm gonna agree with that because if something fails, you may have a fallback, right? at,
Yeah,
at the very least.
true. That's true as
Yeah.
well.
All right. So another question is, what percentage of failures do you think are due to timing?
Oh, wow. I've not thought about that in percentage terms. Uh, I would guess it's pretty high, 50% or more, because
Yeah.
timing can be really, really critical to all kinds of things. And timing is obviously critical to small things that you're doing after you've started the business that are different from the business itself. But I really don't have any expertise in that. I've never studied that particular aspect or looked at it. I'm guessing it's pretty high though, because everything I've known, the big successes have been partly because we just happened to be at the right place at the right time. And conversely, there are I still have some companies that I started or was involved in that I think would have succeeded had we started them today, but did not succeed 10 years ago. And because the world is different.
Yep. You know what? I'm gonna agree with you. I don't know the answer to the question, but I'm gonna say it's pretty high because timing is as important as everything else. It takes a village to build a company, and other than the team and the idea, of course, timing is huge. Um, Ken, what what do you think, um, or how would you deal, or how would you advise entrepreneurs on dealing with the barriers to success?
Um, well, first, do the drill that I talked about earlier. Make sure that you can deal with failure if it happens in it. The second is to use the tool that I talked about earlier of change your mental image from barriers to puzzles. It's really really funny how powerful that shift of outlook is. But it's pretty incredible. Um, so those two things alone would be the ones that would be the most important from my perspective.
Okay, all right. I think that's quite fair. Um, this is kind of tough, right? Because we're asking people to jump in, not worry about it, not be afraid of failure. But then what happens if a venture fails? Anyways, you plan everything, you try everything, you set your goals, you jump into it, and then it fails.
Well, first of all, if you've done as I've said and don't put all of your resources into that venture, uh, you will hit the venture will fail. You'll hit a bottom, and it won't be fun. But then you have to make a decision. Do you jump back into the business world and just take a job, or do you go out and try again? And I know what my answer would be, but that's I'm not. My answer isn't for everybody. For some people, they're going to say, "Well, that was enough of a pony ride on that venture capital world. I don't want to do that again." Uh, but there will be a lot of others who will bounce back up, and I've known them, who are on their second or third company, and finally they get one that really clicks. So I don't think you can predict for the individual, uh, but the individual can maybe predict for themselves by looking at what would happen in the worst case.
Right, right. Um, so I think most of the listeners are going to be thinking of this. They're going to be thinking, okay, maybe I'm young, I don't have many responsibilities, or maybe I have a young family, I have more priorities in life, or maybe it's late in life, I need to worry about start thinking about retirement. So there are different priorities. How do you balance those priorities and in order to really start an entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I certainly recognize that, the person who is, 24-year-old and single has enormously more flexibility than someone who's the same age with a wife and two children. And, but what I've discovered and noticed, is probably a better word, is that the entrepreneurs who've succeeded often are the people who have a wife and two children. Uh, and they don't seem to let that get in the way. Uh, I was single when I was investing primarily, so I don't know what it would be like if you had a wife to deal with and so on. But many people do, and it seems to me from observation that's not a barrier. What would be a barrier is their inability to commit to the enterprise. And that goes back to, have they looked at the alternatives and know that they could deal with them? The alternatives could be, they'd have to move into a smaller house, they'd have a different living style. Would their wife go along with that, et cetera, et cetera? And if the answers are right, then they're empowered probably to go ahead, and certainly motivated because of their kids, in a way that I was not really motivated when I started out free.
Yeah, that's you'd have, if you're married and have kids, you'd have to have the buy-in of the entire family
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. I mean, any entrepreneur who has a wife and children, or just a wife, and doesn't involve them in the decision is a fool, because their life is not a one person life anymore. And it has amazed me how many young women have bought into their husband's dreams, knowing full well. You used Green Dot as an example. Steve put uh, a major portion of all of the money that he had gotten as a retirement bonus from his previous company into that company, into Green Dot, and they took a huge financial risk for themselves because they believed in it. But he had the buy-in of his wife and family. Now, he was later divorced for other reasons, but the point is that you need that.
Yeah, you do, definitely do. Um, all right, so let's see. Oh, I have another question. Hold on. How much initial effort should you invest in time and money in getting the legal part vetted? Exploration of infringement of patents, trademarks, company structure. What are your thoughts on that, Ken?
Well, there's no simple answer to that, because it depends enormously on the kind of company. If the kind of company you have is one whose success is going to depend on first to market, seize market share and run, then the patents and attorneys and so on may not matter as much as hiring the right marketing people. But if you're going into a technical area where you've got some big guys stomping around, you want to try to spend the money to be as sure as possible that your position is protected, which usually means filing your basic user patents, or whatever form of patents you're able to file, so that when you go to an investor and he says, well, do you have any patents? The answer is yes, I do, or I have patents pending, and here's the responses. So it can be very important, but it is also easy. Gosh, I don't know how to answer this in a way. It's easy to make the mistake of just spending too much on legal and accounting and worrying too much about it. So it's a balance there. And uh, initially, I would try to find, if you can find a trusted lawyer or a trusted accountant to kind of guide you in picking your other professionals, that'll help a lot, because you can spend an enormous amount of money on the wrong lawyer or the wrong patent counsel firm, and it's not an experience will let you avoid that. So if you have someone that you can trust and let them help you through that, you'd be well advised to do it, I think.
So Patrick follows on by saying, it seems like this could be a pretty expensive and time-consuming initiative if you don't have an MVP, a minimum viable product, but you work on an MVP, you might be hitting some kind of an infringement issue. That could, be deal breaker down the road. So it's basically what you're saying. It is a balance. You'd have to really figure it out or try to balance the two.
Well, you want to know that what you're creating doesn't infringe somebody else's patent, for example, in your area. So one of the first things we did on several of my companies, it was expensive, but we did it anyway. We would do a preliminary patent search to see if we could find any obvious areas infringing somebody. And if we did, then we reacted and tried to go deeper. But otherwise, we went ahead. So that's one factor. You obviously don't want to swim straight on into Apple's patents, for example.
Yeah, exactly. You want to do that. Okay. Let's see. All right. I think, you know what? I think we're almost there as far as the hour is up. So what I'm going to do, Ken, is I'm going to do a little bit of a closing, but I'm going to ask you for maybe one advice or one recommendation that you would recommend to the audience, but right after I do my closing. So go ahead and think of something, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right. So everyone, thank you for being here today. Again, we appreciate you being part of this broadcast. We're going to do this every 2 weeks. So we have more fireside chats coming up in the next few weeks. So please stay tuned. Again, please make sure that you follow us on YouTube and social media. The recording for this program will be available tomorrow morning. If you want to share with anyone, it will be on our YouTube channel. It would be youtube.com/Ventures, one word. Also, if you have any additional questions to Ken, feel free to email them to me, and I will forward it to him at pvinfo@pismoventures.com. Again, we will have many new broadcasts coming up in the next in a couple of weeks, and further beyond. Please stay tuned for our announcement of these new events. One other thing I want to remind everyone that is, if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, now you'll be able to have access to our full video recording of the business plan competition that we had last year. We will have another one this year, but you're going to learn quite a bit from the live judging and from all the webinars that we have. So please don't hesitate to go to our YouTube channel to look at all the videos that we have available. Ken, again, thank you very much for being here today. Tell us, what's your advice?
Well, my advice is, be sure you have a dream that motivates you at the deepest levels, because emotion matters in this. And if you don't have a dream that you really want, then what's the point of having the dream? So make sure you choose a dream that's worthy and that you can get your soul into.
That's a great advice, Ken. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you. I haven't seen you in a long time. Hopefully we'll see you, after this pandemic is over.
I certainly hope so. I'm tired of looking at four walls, and I'm sure you are.
I am as well. Thanks, Ken. All the best.
Thank
Have a
you.
great day, everyone.
Bye bye.